It's the power of numbers, right? And if you bring it up to your association and maybe create some kind of roundtable discussion with all the right people in the room to understand the supply chain, because maybe a manufacturer doesn't understand all the nuances.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Hey folks, we're in for Simply Trade Podcast, and it is going to be a great discussion today. I am got somebody that I have so much respect for. I love this woman. She is so phenomenal. We have gotten to tag team on some issues when we were both working for express carriers back in the day, if you will. But she is so well respected, knows her stuff, and runs circles around me. But Maureen Cori is coming on today, and we're going to get to have some good discussion on some things. But Maureen, welcome back. You've been on before, and we had your wonderful daughter who is very sharp. Obviously, you did a great job raising her. But as a matter of fact, tell her hello. But how are you doing? How's life treating you right now?
I'm good. I can't complain, except summer's coming to an end. That's a little sad, but you can't complain. Fall is beautiful as well, so we can't complain about that. But yeah, everything's great. I have to say, I really enjoy the Simply Trade podcast. It's my morning routine. I go for my walks and I listen to it and try to catch up. And I always say, I have to go back to that one. So they're really great. And if people aren't subscribing, they should definitely jump on.
Oh, that's one thing. Hey, folks, to that point, please hit the subscribe button.
Great folks on too. Some really super folks that have lots of experience in so many different areas. So it's been really insightful.
With that, let's get into what you've sent a few things. You know what? Where do you want to go with this? Because you are so phenomenal. Yeah. I can try and direct something, but I mean, you run circles around me.
Being too kind now. Being too kind. I don't know about that, but I think maybe we should just follow up from your last roundup. I think with Lalo and on the TSA emergency amendment to the directive. And, I have some information that I could share with you after if you want to post it, just like a slide that really kind of tells some of the talking points. But I think, as everyone's aware, and since your last podcast, I will kind of tag off of that, this TSA CBP Amendment Security Directive, which is 1544-24-02. You made a comment that something must have happened. Something did happen. So there was some type of event that took place that was identified through ACAS, I would imagine, and which drove these emergency changes, some type of explosive material, obviously affecting the supply chain and where it came from. Also, just to mention, Canada is also following the same suit. So if anyone's shipping into Canada, you might want to check it because they're mirroring the same emergency amendments. So I think that's important to know. And I don't know if everyone knows what ACAS is. I think you touched on it on the last one, which is the air cargo advanced screening. I think both of us were very involved in that at the very beginning. And I think you kind of went over it well with what brought it to light. But I think so many years, I was at October 2010, I think was when it was launched, but officially.
Can you believe it's been that long?
I know it's dating myself, but it's definitely, for me and for you and for the nation, it's definitely a wonderful security measure that's in place. And I think Lala was talking about the ISF filing and 10+2. I mean, we could have a whole nother conversation about, CT-PAT for freight forwarders and, those are areas too that could probably enhance this a bit. But anyway, the new data requirements and data sets are basically, there were three: the shipper's name, the shipper's account name, their phone number, and the consignee's phone number. Those were the new data elements that were added on August 28th. And then there were 4 additional elements added effective September 2nd, which is the shipper account number and the shipper account issuer and the shipper's email, as well as the consignee's email. So that's the recent change. And I think what's to come is the 6 additional data elements that aren't out there yet. They're working with IATA, which, for those who don't know IATA, that's the International Air Transport Association, to finalize the messaging standards. So that should be out. And you can really go to CBP's website, and there is an ACAS implementation guide version 2.3, and you will find all the information you need to collect and how to collect it. And it's about a 50-page document. So there's a lot of supporting information there. The additional 6 elements that should be coming down the pike will be interesting, to say the least. So I'm going to read them off to you.
Okay. I'm looking forward to it.
The shipper account type, the verified known consignor, and this is going to be a yes or no submission, the shipper account establishment date, the shipper account billing type. This is the big one, one of 2 big ones, the IP address. Or the MAC address of the shipper, consignee, account creation, etc. And that's a hot topic when it comes to privacy laws around the world. So this, to me, is going to be a very interesting conversation down the road. The other is biodata. So now they're looking for proof of identity, the document number, document country. What they also mentioned within this this guideline is that they would like to see the HS 10-digit code. Now,
this is on the de minimis you're talking about?
No, ACAS. This is 6 additional elements for ACAS.
Okay, for ACAS. So forgive my ignorance on that. But all right, so in the manifesting process, they're wanting the full 10-digit HS on the manifest?
They're not requesting that yet. That's going to be coming, that they would like to see. That one's not mandated yet. But stand by, it might. You never know. That's been a fight forever, right? We know that. Usually 6 digits, but that's what they're recommending. That's what Customs is recommending. Maybe for a B2B scenario, that may not be challenging. Maybe it's just, there's so many challenges within this to begin with. And then they also indicated for self-filers, if they're planning to self-file with Customs, that they need to include all the data elements mentioned just before in the direct messaging to ACAS. So that's just for self-filers. I know. I'm gonna share this with you too, Andy, because there's some good resources out there. I mentioned the implementation guide, obviously TSA, the directive. Transport Canada also has directives. I found some good stuff on the British International Freight Forwarders Association from the international side, also from IATA and from TAPA. So for those of you who are not familiar with TAPA, it's the Transport Assist Protection Association, which is a non-for-profit for cargo thefts and security within the supply chain. And that's made up of manufacturers, carriers, shippers, insurers, service provider, the whole gamut, right? Law enforcers. And then reach out to your carriers, because I'm sure everyone's receiving letters already if you are shipping. There are some carriers that have put a stop to selling to the U.S. Korean Airlines is kind of the only one that I've seen mentioned multiple times.
Well, but see, here, okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, because they have suspended, they are still flying their aircraft, but what they've done is they made a concerted effort to stop selling. So in other words, they're not trying to get more customers until they figure out what they're needing to do. But I think it's important for us to stop for a minute on the ACAS. Here's the deal. On the ACAS, and what's being asked for is information to be transmitted by these transportation companies, airlines, air cargo, freight forwarders, different, providers out there, and transmit the bill of lading information much earlier than what it is today. So I think it's important for us to just stop real quick. What used to happen before even the ACAS itself came along, which is developed by the express carriers again, is that with customs and TSA and everybody else, the government agency, all right. So what happened was we would need to prepare a manifest to say this is what's being loaded onto our aircraft. So we would load up, and it would be coming. So let's say there's a flight coming out of Europe, and we would have to have all of the bill of lading numbers, or air bills, as we would say in that industry. And we would list all that information with the descriptions, the shipper, the consignee, the value, the higher values, the roll-up value, I guess, of the air bill, the total weight, all those things that would come in together. And we would not transmit that to customs as we're preparing it. The flight itself would depart, and then we were required to have it transmitted at least, forgive my ignorance here on my memory, if I'm not,
a long
4
haul
hours
4
before,
hours prior, a long haul flight 4 hours prior to arrival, short haul wheels up.
Yeah. So customs would get this massive load of electronic manifest data, and it would go through their system, and then they would start scrolling to try and make selections, all that. But here's where the key thing is. We would transmit that to say, okay, here are all these air bill numbers and information, and we would have that hours and hours, and just sitting there as we're going, all right, we're looking to see which flight we're going to put it on. A lot of us, the carriers would have multiple flights out of an origin, and it could go on any one of those. So you had to wait, and we had to transmit then the flight number and not only the origin ramp, obviously, but what destination. It could be flying into New York. It could be flying into Indianapolis. It could be flying into Chicago or Memphis or Louisville or wherever it's going, and then transmit it. Well, basically what we discovered when looking at this ACAS is that it was like a false barrier to transmitting data. Why would I say that? Is that we develop a process basically of transmitting the air bill information shortly after receiving it within our own system, and go ahead and send it to customs. The air bill was the common factor, and then we would later update it with the flight number and destination, all that ramp. What that did is empowered, it opened up the window for customs to review that information, which was fantastic. So, all right, now here we are, 14, 15, 20 years later, whatever it is. I don't know. I just, I got that
14.
new mouth. I don't know. It's like 10, 14. Okay, 14 years later. Anyway, so, and as we're looking at it, there are these carriers, Korean Airlines, you just said, and some others. I'm like, guys, you're in the air cargo world. why aren't you, this isn't something that just happened. This is where I have a problem with this. It's like, guys, get up into the 21st century and let's start transmitting this data to customs earlier. So help me out here.
I don't think it's just that. I do understand what you're saying. I think what the difference here is, they're also requiring that you have a known relationship with your sender, shipper, before May. I think it was, I forget exactly the date, but May of this year, right? And I don't know, and I'm not a magician, but I would argue that, we're going back to the safety risk scenario here, and the data is critical. But I think the trouble is, and this is just me speaking from hearing from folks out in the field in Europe. I'll just use Europe because I haven't spoken to anyone in Asia, but it's a multi-layered, complex world, the supply chain. And what they're requesting on the letterhead is basically a statement of, who the shipper was and all the shipper detail, and agreeing that they're a trusted partner, let's just say, right? And, there could be like 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 different folks involved in that one transaction. Yourself, right? So you could have a mom and pop pick up the piece somewhere in a remote area that delivers it to maybe a postal operator, maybe, a courier. And then it goes to another freight forwarder who sends it in transit to another location for a transshipment. And then from there, it picks up from another courier. And then it goes into a hub like London. And now it's already been touched probably 20 times. So based on that statement, I can understand why Korean Airlines is asking or waiting for clarity. They put down a November date. I don't know if that's significant or not, but there needs to be some clarity too, because some of these like mom and pops in the world, they have no ability to do a lot of the things that are there, right? Then you have the folks that do know what they're doing, helping them through this process. So it's complex. There's nothing simple or easy about it. I mean, so to me, the data is great, and I don't think that's really the pain point. I like to say it's not the pain point because I'm not the one doing it, right? But I would think they're all struggling. And so from the rollout to like loss of revenue and the lack of clarity in some of these scenarios, I think also kind of goes back to the fact that this was an emergency amendment, right? Based on intelligence. And maybe there wasn't enough time to talk to trade about it because it was an emergency scenario. And I would hate to say that it was linked to what's going on in Jordan. I don't know, but that you don't know, right? You don't know what it is. And we probably shouldn't know because it's an intelligence, operation that's going on in, loose lips, sink ships kind of scenario. So I think I understand why it's really held close to the vest. But in a scenario like this, then what do? You do the best you can, but is that enough?
Well, and that's to your point. Folks, this is where, as this is going through, there's a reason if it's coming from a security perspective, there's a reason behind that. Now, I will say that, some of the lack of transparency at times with the government is frustrating. It's like, look, that was one of the things that it started out the same way. There was this lack, they started making inquiries of, the companies we were working for when there was this literally legitimate, very serious security risk. And we finally just said, they weren't willing to share information. It's like, look, guys, we're not your enemy. We have, millions of dollars tied up in assets here and all that. And finally they broke down and said, okay, there's a couple of shipments that have been loaded onto some aircraft. And like, look, we've got our pilot crews that we don't want to see, killed here. And secondarily to that is like, we don't want to lose our assets either. So so all of a sudden they realize we were a strong ally to them. This is where I guess I'm looking at this is that it's come down. You said it's an emergency deal. So from an overall perspective, okay, need to comply with it, need to look at it and figure out how to get this information to customs earlier and transmit it earlier. But the other side of that is also getting with the trade associations and seeing what can be done. If you're an importer exporter, you need to be involved in this, but also the carriers involved in all that, and say, what can we do as an industry to make things better? And if you're sitting there and getting your information so much earlier, it's sitting there, you've got a shipment ready to go. The issue here is not where you're going to be the punitive one. The issue here is you want your information to be transmitted as soon as possible to the appropriate authorities, whether it's here in the U.S. or other countries as it's going out, so that your shipments, being the good corporate citizen, they cross the T's, dot the I's, and they're okay with yours, and it gets it out of the way so that folks, the customs agents, can apply their expertise in finding the bad goods and the bad guys, right?
Yeah. Yes. And two things there. One, you want legitimate trade, right, to keep flowing. You want the good actors that work very hard to make sure and spend a lot of money to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And then you have the other side too, where it would be really great at maybe on your show to have some of these associations talking about the real struggles they're having, but also for them, and they may be doing this with our partners in the UK, Europe, Asia, and coming together to discuss the pain points and the reality of this is how the goods move, to go into that deeply. And I would, we also should probably consider the freight forwarding side for CTPAT. It's always kind of been pushed off because it's complicated. It's not easy. We all wouldn't be here if it was easy, right?
Well, and the challenge. Well, and to your point, I mean, if it was easy, anybody could do it. Kind of like, all right, I get that. But here's the scenario. There's also this trust factor with the operators out there and things of that nature, where freight forwarders are buying space on cargo airlines who are, they have they have the assets, if you will. They're also competing directly with these same freight forwarders.
We know it can be done because I think it's understanding it. We've done it through ACAS when it started. It was all the express carriers, without intellectual property getting away, right? Being able to sit there and focus on the issues versus the actual content, right? But you're right. That's part of the fear too, because you don't want to lose your profits, right? You don't want to impact your business, but yet you need to be a partner in it for it to be effective. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. It worked great for us. We all got in a room, got together, talked about the data elements, strictly about data elements, stuck to the rules of the road, and, no antitrust issues. We really were very focused. But your point is really important, because that is a concern for a lot of folks, right?
So as we're doing it, all right, as an importer or exporter, Maureen, is there anything that I'm a small company or what, is there anything I should be looking at to try and say, I support this effort or I don't, or what's going on, or what should I be doing?
Honestly, I think it's about, really knowing your supply chain, right? I mean, nowadays it's all about knowing who you're doing business with, whether it be denied party screening, whether it be, forced labor. But I will say e-commerce is different, right? Because I'm little Johnny at home and I want to buy myself a cool little bag and I can't for school because all of a sudden now these new laws are coming in and I don't understand that. So, and bottom line is everyone's going to constantly buy online. Since COVID, it just completely
It's
changed
mushroom.
everyone's lives. Right. And even from an age group, I mean, you have folks that are very much in the older age group using, e-commerce for almost everything from groceries to,
Well, some of it they've been forced because there are some, like, all right, some of the cities and the crime rate has been so bad that a lot of businesses have just literally shut down because they can't afford to stay open. Well, now you've got a scenario where it forces medications and groceries and all that, the e-commerce, to be ordered and delivered to the home. Well, okay, so all this comes into play. I guess I just look at it from a standpoint that, e-commerce is here to stay. I will also say that I think that there are some abuses in the de minimis realm. So, I mean, that's something I would love to get your opinion on, because de minimis is a hot button right now. But is there anything you want to do before we move away from the TSA amendment here? That's
No, I think the TSA one, I think is pretty much what it is, and it would be great to get some folks on and that are impacted by it overseas, maybe potentially, because I think that would be great for everyone to kind of hear pain points, things that shippers or purchasers can do better. Potentially. But I think from the de minimis standpoint, you said, kind of rolling into that topic, it is a hot topic. It's also an election year. So it's also become, I think it's pretty bipartisan, but I don't know that, I'm not comfortable with the fact that everyone really understands the impacts of the changes, right? Potential changes. I say potential. So to your point, yes, there are people that are abusing it, and there are bad actors that send bad things. And I'm sure they're not listing it as cocaine or fentanyl. They're smuggling it through other means, right? And usually, we've been around the block a few times. A lot of these are internal conspiracies. A lot of these happen in-house, and the companies don't even know it until they get caught out on it. But I think just recently, I think it was last Friday, the Biden-Harris announced that they are looking to publish a notice of proposed rulemaking, and basically the Glax switches, the pill presses, the fentanyl, and those that are abusing from a textile standpoint, footwear, which you mentioned Shein before, Temu, Shein, those are Alibaba. There's a few others, but and that it's impacting the American market. So I think for that one, it's, to me, for the textile, footwear, electronics, that's a cultural shift. And that's you and me as a purchaser. What do we know about any of this? How are we educating those folks that are sitting behind a computer, getting on Amazon and making their order? Or, going on Temu and placing, an order for 10 shirts because it's $50. So I'm going to buy 10 shirts. And, you can go down the whole other road when it comes to, sustainability. That's a whole nother conversation for the younger generation that really is focused on that. This is kind of counterproductive, but, I think when we look at all of the e-commerce coming in, I think COAX said it was currently, last year was at 4 billion, and we're already at 4 billion for this year. So it's just exploding. And I want to say it was like 190,000 back prior to COVID. So,
yeah.
So and don't quote me on the numbers because I'm just doing that off the top of my head.
It is like
close to that,
100 times more than what it used to be, kind of thing. It's just astronomical what's going on. Anyway, that said, here's where I will say that I don't understand why customs didn't require it. But on the flip side of it, it's like, okay, what do we do from this point forward? And that's this. When these de minimis, there's containers that come in and they're loaded with these small e-commerce type shipments, and from Shein, from Temu, or somebody else, or whoever else. And they're coming in with a tractor trailer full of these things and all that. And they're trying to present it to customs to say, okay, here's a section 321 manifest or a de minimis manifest. And they're trying to clear it through and all that. And customs is going, well, we want to see some of this. Well, I don't know where, I can't just pop the doors here. I'll block everything. See, to me, that's where I'm like, wait a minute. You guys need to require a scenario here that if you're going to clear it as a de minimis, there ought to be reimbursables there for customs to deal with it. There ought to be electronic manifest requirements so that it's transmitted before arrival. And thirdly is that the facilities need to be there to where, all right, you're going to clear through over here, whatever, and you get through and require that every piece be accounted for and all that, electronically scanned, sorted, whatever, just like the rest of it, that we were dealing with. We were being that good corporate citizens. We were having to pay as an express carrier the reimbursables on it. The point being is now it's like they're trying to clear using old conventional ways to say, well, here's a consolidation, if you will, or something, and it just do it as a manifest. It's not that. You're talking tens of thousands of shipments. It's unrealistic. So to me, I'm like, wait a minute, if you're going to utilize that and do that, put limits over it, whatever, so that, all right, I can process maybe, 15, 20 shipments. You walk up, there it is. That's fine. But if you get over there, it's like, look, I need a facility and have customs require that. That to me is where the industry needs to go.
Well, I'm not going to really say either way, but I will say this. There is regulations under 128 for express carriers. They're highly integrated. They're highly automated. They have complete visibility. And that's why de minimis is what it is in the express world under entry type 86. And the reimbursables were put in place to remove the overtime costs for customs, right? For handling. That's kind of the history of that. What's happened now is, I think Cindy Allen really explained it very well. She did
do a good job with that.
She did a great job, and it's a fact, right? So it's all factual stuff. They couldn't handle the data entry volume of Section 321 during COVID, so they came up with a pilot. This is still a pilot. So I think when we talk about forwarders, they're not integrated. This kind of goes into the ACAS scenario, right? They need more information, or the CTPAT scenario with forwarders. It's not integrated in the same fashion at all. I think to your point about customs being reimbursed, well, maybe it's not reimbursing. Maybe it's funding. Maybe it's allocating funds properly and appropriately versus taking away funds in certain areas. I think this is a whole different ballgame and world we're living in. And from a geopolitical standpoint, you'd be crazy not to use AI in some form, some type of technology. And that's what they need. I think the answer is that, the volume is incredibly high to catch everything. But I would also kind of say, to me, yes, they do need processing centers, which they're opening one at JFK coming January, I believe. But that's also going to be more cost on the consumer. We're all going to be paying for it somehow. So
we're paying for it now. See, that's the problem that I have, is that it's whether they're circumventing. Yeah.
It goes back to the educating the consumer, because the consumer is the one buying this stuff, right? They're not aware of what's going on in the customs realm. They're not, I don't even know if they're interested or not interested, because, you're talking about everyone in the US is using this all around the world. Forget about just the US. But we need to work smarter, not harder. And we need software. It's a multi-layered approach, whether it be from forced labor to security to classification of goods, that, and some of the issues with the Section 321s more recently were the broker suspensions. And it goes back also to the changes under 111 with the broker being the importer of record and reasonable care. I think there also needs to be a lot more dialogue around that when it comes to, okay, data. You're dealing with how much data, how many people are processing it. And you don't necessarily need more people if you have technology to support it, right? I know I've talked to you about Hurricane in the past. There's so many different ones. Altana has been on. There's so many different options out there for a multi-layered approach to combat some of this stuff, right? And the big suspension issues, from what I've seen, a lot of it is poor and vague descriptions. That's also the problem for ACAS, right?
Exactly.
You have poor and vague descriptions. Constantine is called Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. I'm being serious. Or I don't know. Or, silly things that are red flags.
And you know that it's bogus. So it's like, all right, so.
Right. So like if a custom can flag them, right, and put them aside, you really got to find the root cause. And the root cause is the shippers, right? When they're shipping this
There
stuff.
you go. See, and there's, I guess the other thing that is we go through that, to me, there's regulations right now in place. All customs has to do when they come across it, require an entry. And if they start flagging that and just require an entry on that, all of a sudden, guess what's going to happen? They're going
to call Andy and say, Andy, can I have your social security number? Because I have to clear the shipment in your name. I need to give you a POA, but the shipment's $10 or $50. But they didn't tell me that.
They'll refuse it. Yeah. And at some point they're going to stop. It will stop that mess. But the other side of that is where people will go, I didn't receive my goods. They will, reverse the charges or not pay them or whatever the case is. So the point being is, this is where I'm going, is that those shippers then, to me, I think it's also another scenario. You start doing that kind of stuff. Those shippers, it's a privilege to, import into a country. So it's like, okay, guess what? That shipper's going to be, flagged and rejected. Well, then you got a scenario where, they'll just, and this is what everybody says, they'll just shut down that company and open up another company. It's a show. I know it. It's a show game, but they keep going through that. And I think there are ways to look at it and say, you know what? We're going to require an entry from anything from this shipper.
I know, but I think your point is well taken. And I think at the COAC this week was their quarterly. And I was a little disappointed from, them making the announcement at the beginning about the Biden-Harris administration. And then when the recap came up for the committee, it was very nonchalant and kind of vague. And it's a hot topic. So to me, are we having all the right people in the room? Are we educating or planning to educate consumers? Are we looking at all the pain points? Is it really about a $2 reimbursable fee, or is it about really funding Customs and Border Protection where it's needed and doing that properly? I'd also argue, if we look at export controls, it's extraterritorial, right? So if you're a U.S. person, it applies to you wherever you are in the world. If we could get something like that along the lines of you can't ship it unless it has valid information before it even exits. My favorite line when back in the express world was export is the new import. If you export it properly, you will not have a problem importing it.
There you go. Well, and to your point, here's the other thing, I guess, that with all this that's coming about and the confusion on it and companies like, we're going to just stop selling in the U.S. or we're going to do this. All right. Part of this scenario is we're looking at it is we want to get reasonable with this. This is where there's bogus information that's coming in on these shipments. And it's like, folks, you don't want to see that. You want to push back. You want to prevent it. We've got to figure out a way to fund this with customs because it's unrealistic that customs is getting blamed for some.
And the brokers too. Yeah, the brokers are getting hit. The brokers are also getting hit with fines and penalties for things that they really to be fair, cannot control because it's already here, the goods. To me, some things they can control, a lot of things they can control, but do they know what's actually in the box?
Mm-hmm. Well, and so in what we do with it, I guess this is one of those things, because we're going to need to kind of wrap up here because we can keep on going, so what's the action here there's a lot of things happening. Obviously, brokers are very involved. In this case, the carriers. What do you think needs to happen here as far as some activity to get up to? There's got to be some definitive actions taken to get this to a certain point for not only short term but longer term. What do you recommend there?
Well, I think all associations, regardless of whatever industry you're in, whatever your pain points are, whatever you feel is necessary and passionate about for your business and your obviously your revenue and obviously safety, you need to bring it up to your associations. And I think it's the power of numbers, right? And if you bring it up to your association and maybe create some kind of roundtable discussion with all the right people in the room to understand the supply chain, because maybe a manufacturer doesn't understand all the nuances that a carrier pain points are. I don't know that would ever happen, but those are the types of things I think COAC is good for, right? Where industry comes, but do we have all the right folks there? And I'll tell you one thing, the poor small, medium-sized businesses are the ones who are really going to get hit, and they're going to be the ones that are really going to have a hard time. The Etsy's, the artists, the folks that have unique businesses, because they probably don't know enough about where to go or have the information to begin with until it's too late.
And that's where I come back to the trade association. I'm a big proponent of that. By the way, for those that are listening, we've mentioned COAC a few times, and I always have to pull it up to remember what it is. COAC stands for Commercial Customs Operations Advisory Committee. So, Customs Operations Advisory Committee is what it is. It's private sector. And yeah, it's private sector and government working together on some issues and whatnot. So it's a very good thing. But in that, you don't need to be, heavily involved in government and regulatory affairs. You can do it through your trade associations. You mentioned the manufacturers, there's the footwear, there's the textile industries, there's all these different things that are going on. I would suggest that it's one of the takeaways here. There's a lot of things going on that affects the security of cargo coming into the country. If you're buying goods and your freight forwarder is moving it through cargo airlines or whatever, you need to work with them, because your supply chain is going to be disrupted if that carrier is not transmitting information timely and all of that. Again, the issue here is you want to be the good corporate citizen, cross the T's and dot the I's, so that your information on your shipments are transmitted, processed, are accurate, and it gets them out of the way so that the government agencies involved can apply their expertise on the bad stuff. So.
Yeah. And if I could just add 2 more points too. If you don't have a global trade management system per se, processes, procedures, validations, self-audits, external audits if you need to build that into your business, whatever business that is. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're a broker, a freight forwarder, a carrier. Those are key components to success. If you don't have a process or a plan, ignorance is not bliss.
I get it. And it's like ignorance is no excuse for non-compliance, period. So
yeah. And have a compliance person, right? And if you can't train somebody, have somebody that's virtual working for you as a fractuary or something along those lines. That's what I would recommend.
All right. Once again, Maureen, you are fantastic. I love it. I love the discussion. Folks, I'm going to tell you, this is somebody that if you are in need of somebody, just ask questions of what we've talked about. We'll have Maureen's contact information out there, and you can send notes to her or myself and others, but we'd be glad to help answer it. But Maureen she would be one to help you get your business on track too. So, thank you so much once again. You're always just a sheer pleasure to be around. I love you. You're great. So,
thank you. It was great. Right. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Hopefully folks, I helped.
Oh, definitely. Folks, we're going to turn it over to you. Again, please share us, subscribe to us, follow us, look us up on LinkedIn and connect with us. It'd be great. But with all of that, we're going to turn it back over to hopefully you'll have a great day. Yeah, keep supporting Simply Trade Podcast. We love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.